We're in a reality where rupturing a woman's uterus and popping some guy's eyes out of their sockets is just considered acceptable collateral damage. So you're looking at these events through the eyes of Satan, breaking the fourth wall. Again, there's a line that says, even the least deductive readers won't need this spelled out for them. So sassy. Hello. Today I want to talk about Splatterpunk author Edward Lee. Edward Lee is a name that has come up repeatedly since I've started making videos about extreme horror books, and from what I can tell, he seems very highly regarded within the genre. So far, I've read 2 books by him. I did read The Pig last year from a viewer recommendation, and then also for my Christmas video I read Here Comes Santa Claus, but those are the only 2 ones I've read from him so far. So I thought it was about time that I took a bit of a deeper dive into some of his work. Before I even get into the specifics, what I can say, when I do these author focus videos, my main goal as I'm going through a bunch of books from the same author is I'm looking for what it is about them that sticks out to me. Where do I think that they shine? What makes them unique? What I noticed is that Edward Lee, he seems to be a very passionate reader. That's the type of thing that we might take for granted, that we might assume that an author is going to be an avid reader. But honestly, I think sometimes people just feel inspired from their own fantasies or their own dreams, and they just want to share that with the world. They're not necessarily much of a reader themselves. It just became clear. He talks about his inspirations for some of the books that he's written, reading the same author over and over and over again, just falling in love with their world building. And it just seemed very clear to me that this is someone who genuinely loves the genre, loves reading the genre. And I think that that kind of love and affection is transparent in the work that he produces. And on a bit of a different note, he does fairly regularly break the fourth wall. In some stories, repeatedly, quite a lot actually. And that is something that I enjoy as a reader, for the author to address me directly. Especially the way he does it, but well, I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll get there. I did notice it in the Christmas story, which was very short. Now, I'm not going to be discussing that story again today, but I am going to bring up the pig again, because that was the story that was brought up to me several times, actually. It's a series. There's The Pig, The House, and Ouija Pig. They can be purchased separately, or they can be purchased under the title Three Little Pigs. So I usually focus on standalones, but I figured I've already read The Pig. Why not just follow the rest of the trilogy, right? So first things first, let's review The Pig. The Pig is about a man named Leonard who has a passion for filmmaking. Leonard is very creative and desperately wants to be a filmmaker. However, he just does not have the financial means in order to afford all the equipment that he would need in order to pursue that. His desperation to pursue this career, to pursue this passion project, it gets to the point where he is willing to break the law to try to acquire this equipment. Now, I'm not going to get into all the nitty-gritty details, but needless to say, he gets in over his head. One thing leads to another, and he ends up owing quite a bit of money to the mafia. Now, since he cannot pay them back, what ends up happening is that they basically force him into indentured servitude, where he is using his filmmaking skills in order to make adult films that the mafia can sell. It's one of those things where in theory he's working off his debt. Is he ever actually going to get out of his debt? Probably not. Also, they're not just making normal adult films. He is forced to live in this house in the middle of nowhere, and the performers, which are mostly strung out drug addicts, they're there because of the mafia, right? Like this this isn't like a real clean cut operation, right? So Leonard is using all of his creative juices. Oh, That was a poor choice of words. He's using his creative skills in order to make these adult films that are just, especially sketchy. We're talking animal stuff. We're talking snuff, scat, gross, niche, fetish type content that the mafia can specialize in. Stuff that is kind of designed to maybe be a little harder to get, at least at the time. And so he does that, and the situation of these people at this house becoming more and more dire leans a little bit more supernatural towards the ending than what you would think towards the beginning of the book. Looking back, because I read this quite a few months ago, the thing that stood out about this book to me is that I actually found it quite depressing. The undertone, because, of course with splatterpunk, you're going to have dark themes, but oftentimes there is kind of a absurdity to it that doesn't make it that depressing. It just makes it wild and crazy. All the people who are kind of trapped, stuck in this house in debt to the mafia, there is such a numb acceptance of their circumstances, detached from their emotions. And something about that makes it sadder to me than if they were actually screaming and crying and carrying on. The defeat. I guess they were all very defeated. Although, again, don't get me wrong, the book certainly does have some crazy out there elements as well. It's not completely serious. And I also guess I have to mention, before we move on, is that the title of the story it's not just a random title, that there is a pig that plays a significant role in the events that unfold. The next book in the series is called The House, and just as the title would insinuate, it is about the house where all of those other events took place. Very isolated, so it wasn't a situation where Leonard could just run away. They had to keep them very isolated as they were doing all of these projects and whatnot. Kind of like a no one can hear you scream type vibe. The house takes place about 30 years after the events from the first book. Our main character is named Melvin, and his character is exactly what you would expect him to be with the name Melvin. Melvin is an adult man, and he does have a job. He works for a paper that he writes for, but he is a little bit behind socially. He's a little socially inept, a little awkward. So when Melvin gets this job and he needs to go to this house to write about it being haunted, his father thinks it will be a good idea to send his new wife, Melvin's stepmother, to go with him to this house so he is not alone. This is not presented as a really good father making a really good decision. Doesn't really make much sense. There's really no clear reason why her being there would actually be beneficial to Melvin in any way. It seems like it's sort of meant to be something that is meant to kind of infantilize Melvin. Here's where I really started to notice certain things about the way that Edward Lee writes. The thing about Melvin's stepmother, Gwyneth, is that she is a bit of a hippie type. She likes to walk around naked, because of course she does, and she likes to make artwork out of animal bones. I mean, she's not killing the animals. She just likes to find the bones outside and then make cool art with them. And honestly, I think as far as hobbies go, there are many worse ones you could have. The problem that Melvin is experiencing is the fact that he has absolutely no respect for Gwyneth. He thinks that she is a complete and utter airhead. In his head, he belittles her artwork that she cares about, and he just thinks it's very trite and that she's just full of hot air. But he does think she's very attractive, and he has a very big crush on her. And so it's like this really annoying thing where he's constantly ogling her, but also insulting her in his head. It's interesting to read, actually, because you have this perspective of this man who is a virgin, by the way, and has no sexual prowess, no sexual experience with women. I don't want to shame that specifically, but within the confines of the story, to understand that we have a man who his first experience that he has with a woman, he picks up a hitchhiker. He's gonna pay her, and he's super stoked because he's gonna, finally get some action, right? But he doesn't get that far. And she just touches him on the outside of his pants. And he just comes in his pants. I'm not shaming virginity as an adult. You do you. But what I am shaming is that if you are at a point in your life that this is where you're at, having a man who just jizzed in his pants, trying to convince us that this really hot woman who makes really unique gothic art is some kind of loser is like not working. It's not working. Like, she does not come across as a loser. She comes across as shallow, sure, a little bit controlling, definitely a little bit weird. I guess the point I'm trying to make is she's not better than him, but he's also not better than her. It kind of comes across as like a coping mechanism that he resents being attracted to her physically because he's so turned off by her in every other way. Anyway, Gwyneth does go with him to this house. She's walking around naked half the time, which does lead us into a feature that is not unique to this book. And it makes sense in this book that this woman is walking around naked. She's very attractive. It makes sense that the author is going to talk about her body. But I have to say, something that I've noticed is not unique to this book, but in the books that I read, fairly consistent, is that I'm not going to say every female character, I'm just going to say the vast majority. The majority of female characters, even if they are just playing a small role and aren't really important to the story at all, he will describe their tits to you. He will let you know if they are big or small. He will give you an idea of roughly how big any female character's chest is. Bigger than a grapefruit, but smaller than a melon. Or, oh, the size of a tennis ball. The size of an infant's head. At least in this case, it does make sense under the circumstances. But even when it doesn't really have any pertinence, it's still in there. But anyway, Gwyneth and Melvin are at this house. Melvin does have to leave the house occasionally, and he meets this hitchhiking woman named Squirrely, and she is kind of there in order to provide him with additional background about the house because her sister, I think, was one of the adult actresses who got mutilated at the house. So she has some insider knowledge about the events, because the thing is that Melvin, he knows that there's a history that took place at this house, but he doesn't really believe in ghosts and hauntings and all of that nonsense. His project, he's sent there because they want him to write about a haunting, but he's kind of more interested in just the history of the house. He's gonna kind of just make up some BS to satisfy his boss, but really the interesting part is the history side of things as far as he's concerned. However, as he is finding out more information about the events that took place at this house, there are also strange occurrences happening within the house to him and Gwyneth. It gets to the point that Gwyneth's behavior is increasingly strange. It'll be something that he'll witness her pee outside and then get down on her knees and like put her face into the soil. And he'll be like, well, that's weird. But then she'll deny that having happened and she'll act like he's crazy. And as the reader, you're hearing this through his perspective, but you're not 100% sure if he's actually seeing things accurately or not. Like you're not really 100% on board with her being the ultimate source of truth by any means. But you're not really sure if he has an accurate interpretation of events either. What becomes apparent throughout the story is that these are not just random events. Rather, it is more of a haunting type situation. They're sort of being infected by the ghosts of the past, where they are both reenacting things that actually did happen previously at the house. Will they be able to escape this house, or is the house going to claim them? And that's kind of where the ending is leading up to. This book also had moments of breaking the fourth wall, which again I really like. I think it's funny. It seems like a common way that Edward Lee chooses to break the fourth wall is when he doesn't want to write something. Like when he just doesn't feel like it. So he'll just break the fourth wall to let you know that it wasn't an oversight to not include a certain description or something, but that he just didn't feel like it. I mean, shit. I mean, yeah, I guess it's like he wants to make sure that you know it was on purpose. Don't get it twisted. This was a fun read. There wasn't so much of the depressing undertones in this one to me because Melvin felt very strongly about the events that were unfolding. So it felt like there was still some fight in him. But yeah, this one was fun. I enjoyed this one. But I also knew that this was not the end because we have the third part of the series, which is Ouija Pig. Now, this is kind of one of those, oh, there is a paranormal team. No, paranormal research team that's going to investigate. I just spit. That is going to investigate this haunted location. So we have our crew here. We have Jake, who is the dude who's like the boss, but really it's just his dad is wealthy and funding everything, and that's why he gets to be the boss. His girlfriend, Chloe, who Jake really wants to have spicy time because he just thinks she's really, really hot. Chloe hates him. Chloe is the worst. For her purpose on the show, the Paranormal Patrol show, she's portraying herself as like a witch slash demonologist. That's her role that she's playing. But really her real role is just being a big bitch. It's not even the fact that she's prudish, because to each their own, but she is so mean about it. She uses her sexuality to try to control Jake and like lead him around, which just makes it clear how much she doesn't actually care about him in any way. But to be fair, Jake doesn't give a shit about her either. Like, he is just attracted to her. So you could argue that they deserve each other. Her character was just mean, not just to Jake, but to everyone. Just a mean character. Just a mean lady. We don't like Chloe. We don't like Chloe. Okay. We also have Sarah. Her role is she's kind of pretending to be psychic. She's more easygoing, but she is also hyper horny. So she's kind of the opposite of Chloe, where she's not prudish at all, less annoying, but almost a little bit too aloof, a little too indifferent, and she cheapens herself quite easily. And then there is the final guy of the lineup, Theo, who is the videographer, who is madly in love with Sarah. He's kind of been friend zoned or whatever. They've known each other since they were kids. And he has never asked Sarah out, but he feels as though she should just know. But it's very painful for him to watch her hooking up with every man who's ever existed, because she do be doing that. So yeah, that's our crew. They go into the house to do their paranormal patrol and see what kind of ghosts they can scrounge up. And what do you know? As we've established in the second book, it is haunted. Things do be happening, but they are like begging for it. They're doing seances, they're using a Ouija board, they're doing all sorts of things trying to get paranormal activity for their show. And it's, you know, like, oh, we have to do a seance, but according to it's like spirits are more likely to respond if women specifically are naked. Not the men, though, because, like, ew. Like, just the women have to be naked during the seance or the Ouija board or whatever. So the girls are annoyed, but they do it. The men are just, like, staring and, like, drooling at these naked women. I understand why it's in there. I get it. I understand. These men are just written to be so stupid. I understand that if you have a beautiful woman and she's naked, you're going to be like, ooh, but like you're trying to commune with the dead. Like, get it together, my guy. Now, what I noticed about this book in comparison to the second book is that, yes, these characters are practically begging the house to interact with them and ghosts and all of that. And it works. There's more like direct influence from the ghosts themselves. It's not just people kind of going through these motions, not understanding why. Like, there is more direct influence and communication with the supernatural elements and the other characters. The absurdity that happens at the end of this book. I don't want to spoil it. But Sarah goes through something particularly ridiculous. And I'm not even talking about her ending. I'm just talking about something happens that causes Sarah to leave the house. In a very sudden way. And it was my favorite part of the entire book. Things do escalate at the end. The supernatural elements really come full blown. It gets so funny and weird. And like I really felt like there was a tone shift towards the end where it just got so crazy. But I also think that this one, for me at least, Theo in particular, the influences within the house are promising him that if he does X, Y, and Z, then they have the power to give him Sarah, which is all he really wants, right? And there's all sorts of red flags. There's commentary here on the idea that when you want something so badly and someone promises that they can fulfill your greatest wish, it's like the genie, right? It's never just goes as according to plan. Like, oh, I want to be a millionaire, and then you have $1 million. There's always a catch. And then you really would just ignore all these red flags and make a deal with the devil just to have a chance at getting what you want. That lack of foresight, that lack of thinking of the big picture, that there are worse things in life than not getting what you want. I always found that so interesting, that the idea of kind of selling your soul, which isn't exactly what's happening here, but whatever. Close enough. You're selling your soul to the devil in exchange for some sort of earthly, worldly desire. The idea of giving up forever in exchange for like a good 50 years is idiotic. The different things I appreciated about all three of these books, but overall, I liked the series together. I think the series is greater than the sum of its parts. Next up, we are going to talk about the television. So this is about a man named Farthing who is notified that his uncle his uncle Eldred died and left him a bunch of money and his trailer and all this stuff. So here's the thing. As his uncle's sole heir, he only gets the money if he agrees to live in his uncle's trailer. So if he moves to England from the States, lives in the trailer, he will get to take $3,700 monthly stipend for life. In the States, he actually also lives in a trailer, but he does not have all this other stuff going on. So he goes to England to check it out, and he's not real attached to going back home. So he's open to the idea of actually moving there. He's got this guy Cooper, who is the one kind of handling the estate stuff. He's showing him around, all of this stuff. There's this one room in the back of the trailer that has nothing in it besides a television and a chair. But the television doesn't work. It does not have a plug to even try to work. And so, of course, the fact that there's a chair in front of the television would make you think that it does work. What goes on here? Right? He's just thinking, well, his uncle liked antiques. It's just some garbage, whatever. When he's spending that first night and he's, creeping around, because of course he's gonna rummage through the belongings, right? Of course. He finds a photo album filled with his uncle getting freaky with a whole lot of people. It is just smut starring his uncle and every woman within a 50-mile radius. Like, whoa, Uncle Eldred, what the There's your first sign that something was not necessarily off, but just abnormal. And then he finds the television actually does work, or it can work. And it turns out that instead of being a normal TV, this is a TV that solely shows images from the worst, most heinous, the most heinous, depraved events that have ever taken place on Earth. So we're talking war crimes. Saddam Hussein makes an appearance. Various genocides. Intense, overpowering images of just atrocities that have actually occurred in human history. And these images on the television are also reflected in his dreams. And I know what you're thinking. Why? Well, it turns out that this is a genetic thing, that he specifically, Farthing, specifically has the ability to turn on the TV that other people want to see. Other people want to see these atrocities. They want to see the images. They want to use Farthing in order to turn on the TV for kind of cult-like activities. This was probably my favorite one that I read out of this group. There's a lot going on here because it's not even that Farthing just agrees to all of these things. There's a lot of blackmail involved to coerce him into complying with the culty situation. And so there is kind of an element to this of succumbing to the evil forces around you. Well, evil just consumes everything and you're not really sure if he's truly corrupted at this point or if he's just coping. Pregnancy plays a pretty big role in this book, which makes sense. Everything about this plot, that makes sense. But that is another thing that I've noticed Mr. Lee includes a lot. He talks about pregnant women a lot. Like they are in one way or another in almost, if not all of these stories where there is at least one pregnant woman at some point in the story. It is just a very common subject that he brings up. Something that I've noticed about his writing in general as a splatterpunk author. You know, compared to a lot of the other authors that I've read, I would say he actually has less gore than you might expect. But what he does possess is a lot of depravity. A lot of very dark, depraved themes. A lot of sexual depravity. A lot of pregnant women. And there does often seem to be those layers. There is a lot of bodily fluids, though. I will say that. Next up, I want to talk about the Dollhouse. There is a preface in this saying that he was inspired from horror writer M.R. James' The Haunted Doll's House. I have not read this author, so I do not know what specific things he took inspiration from other than clearly the theme of the Dollhouse, but I appreciated him kind of calling out. It was stuff like that that made me mention what I said before about clearly having a love for this genre and clearly taking great inspiration from his favorite authors who have created worlds that he just loved being a part of. Now, the Dollhouse is about a man named Reginald Lipton. And he is a asshole. Mean. He's just a mean man. We do not like Reginald, okay? The type of guy who has a beautiful wife who loves him, who tries to show intimacy with him, and he's like, I'm used to you by now. You're nothing special to me anymore. Get out of here. But then he's like drooling over other women simply because they're new. That's 1 point against him. 2 points. He's mean. He's just mean to people. The way he talks to people, he's impatient. He talks down to people. He's a big baby. He whines. Oh my god, I got scratched. This is terrible. Ugh. And he like acts like a big baby because he got scratched by a plant. Like, my god, man, suck it up. But he is super stoked. He does collect dollhouses and he enjoys the craftsmanship of people who build these miniatures. In the dollhouse making world, there is this absolute legend named Lancaster. Lancaster Patton has now passed away, but he gets word that one of 4 dollhouses, he built a total of 4 dollhouses, and that one of them is for sale. So he tries to go to try to purchase this dollhouse before the sales ad actually gets published to other people. He kind of gets like an early word. So he goes there, and he continues to be a terrible, terrible man because he is overjoyed with the state of this dollhouse. It is beautifully crafted. He finds out that the dollhouse is actually a recreation of the house that he's in when he's trying to purchase it. He realizes that he's purchasing this house from an ancestor of the actual dollhouse builder. And you would think that that would make him show some goddamn respect, but no, he just completely befuddles this man and convinces him that it is worth like a fifth of what he asked for. And this poor man, because he doesn't realize that the sales ad didn't go out yet, he doesn't know that this guy got early word, so he's thinking that, oh, this is the only person that's shown any interest. If I don't take advantage of this one seller, I might not get another, which is not true, but he doesn't know that. He doesn't know how valuable this dollhouse is within the dollhouse making community. Reginald takes advantage of this man because he's terrible and mean, and he buys the house for just that little bit. Well, guess what? Turns out that this dollhouse is not a normal dollhouse. And Reginald gets his comeuppance, and you're happy about it. Every single book that I read from him for this video has some sort of supernatural influence. Okay, next up we have Nipping Them in the Bud. This is about a man named Sharsted. We start off where he is having a very intense, vivid feeling dream that he is basically just floating in darkness. It's sort of the equivalent of like a sensory deprivation tank, but it's just very disorienting. But then he wakes up and you realize it was just a very ominous dream to start off the story. He goes to a Chinese restaurant, and that is when he meets this man. His real name is Rugwell, but Sharsted calls him Wimpy. He has his reasons. Now, everything that's taking place in this restaurant, there is an attempted armed robbery. Wimpy steps in and kind of saves the day, but doesn't take credit for saving the day. Everything just feels a little bit off as you're reading it. And so for me, at least, I kept thinking like, oh, is he still dreaming? Like it had that kind of dreamlike quality to it. But it just turns out that Wimpy is a supernatural entity, let's say. He is basically proposing that if Sharsted agrees to help him murder bad people, he will be ultimately rewarded in the afterlife if he agrees to help him kill bad people, or people who are going to be bad people, people who are going to do bad things. It gets into that kind of moral quandary of, have you ever heard, oh, would you kill baby Hitler if you got the opportunity? And having to try to like actually answer that question. If you knew that that baby was going to turn into Hitler and do everything that he did, would you be able to kill a baby? He kind of agrees at first because in the beginning it feels easier because it's situations where it seems much more clear cut. You see somebody doing something terrible, and so you don't feel bad, eliminating them from this world. But then, oh, well, this person hasn't done anything yet, but they're going to. Like, I can see the future. I can show you the terrible things they're going to do. But we need to eliminate them before they get a chance to do those bad things. And it kind of becomes like, how far can you push it before you just can't do? Like, how far removed do you have to be from the actual bad thing happening, or you just cannot justify the harm that you're doing? At what point does it not feel justified anymore? The ending, it was very appropriate, but it was rather dark. It also kind of gets into the idea, can someone be born evil. And that kind of nature versus nurture, the idea of fate. And can you change your fate? There's a lot of little intricacies here if you want to go down that route. Well, and also we're kind of getting into that same subject of how much suffering are you willing to impart onto others in order to save yourself? And that's a little bit of from the television as well, where that line is. And last but not least, we have the Innswitch Horror, which he wrote inspired by his love of H.P. Lovecraft. There was something about this that I actually found rather charming. A fan finds out his favorite story from his favorite author is actually based off of a real place and real events, and he gets submerged into this reality. And there's something so charming about Edward Lee writing this story about someone getting sucked into the world of their favorite author. Our main character, Foster Morley, this is the story of a man who is obsessed with H.P. Lovecraft. He refers to him as the master, and he is trying to travel in his footsteps, see the same scenery that he saw, exploring the area where he wrote The Shadow over Innsmouth. Basically, there's this town filled with these weird, creepy people, and this town has a lot of pregnant women in it. And so Foster Morley is like, oh, this seems like it might have been the town that inspired H.P. Lovecraft's story. He doesn't think that the events of the story are real, though. He just thinks that this place was an inspiration, and that there just happens to be a strangely large number of pregnant women. Much like in the H.P. Lovecraft story, it turns out that there are sea monsters involved, and that there are some arrangements between the sea monsters and the people of this town. I guess we'll leave it at that. Our main character, he gets a little bit more invested in the town and comes to find out that it was real. And so you have these mixed elements of his fear, but also an element of excitement at this discovery and about being a part of something that H.P. Lovecraft was a part of. And I think for me in particular, because I tried to read H.P. Lovecraft and I really struggled. I absolutely loved The Color Out of Space, but everything else that I read from him, I really struggled with because I just found it to be riddled with purple prose, a lot of phonetic dialogue. It's not unusual to see people include that in little bits, but he would include it for very, pages and pages. I found it difficult to follow. I found it tiring to read. But this is kind of the perfect example to me that I said in that video that I think H.P. Lovecraft's biggest contribution to the genre is his concepts, that I think his concepts are stronger than his actual writing, and that I think it is like a jumping point for talented writers to be able to come in and take those concepts and kind of run with it. And I think that that's exactly what this is. I did really enjoy this one as well. I do think it was a very nice tribute to an author that clearly has inspired him and meant a lot to him as an author. You can see the way that his writing, he tweaks it. He adjusts his writing for the style. He isn't just like a one-trick pony. You can see in Innswitch Horror that there is a genuine attempt here to not mimic per se, but you can tell that he adjusted his writing style for the story to be more like H.P. Lovecraft. Even though the stories and his style do vary for the type of story that he's writing, there is a certain level of consistency here. I think it's fun to read somebody who seems like they're having fun and not taking themselves too seriously. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And maybe I'll see you the next time around. Bye. It gets to a point where Gwyneth's